So next up, going and delving into the catalog of Radiohead for the first time. Radiohead. And in the this is Pablo Honey, their debut album. In the opening montage, you heard "Creep," and now you're going to hear a clip from "Liturgy."
I mean, we should say up front that this is your favorite band, right?
Well, yes, we can say this is my favorite band, Josh.
Okay.
So Radiohead's Pablo Honey, running some numbers here, comes in at number 177 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums, number 18 in 1993, number 928 of all time. It's Radiohead's 9th highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, making it their lowest rated album in their entire catalog because they have 9 albums. So wow. I'm not going to go. We're going to cover a good majority of the other ones, but there's pretty much every album after this one apparently is better than this one according to Best Ever Albums. So there you go.
Critics love Radiohead, man.
Oh yeah, critics love Radiohead. Pablo Honey did not make Rolling Stone's list, and Radiohead is ranked number 2 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums, behind
Bob Dylan?
The Beatles. So
Matt's
Radiohead
favorite band. Yeah.
So it's like basically.
Does that make you a basic
albums,
bitch, Matt?
It makes it basic.
That kind of makes
you
you a
albums
basic.
is just like
basic.
They took all their takes from me.
Basic
Is basically what
bitch.
it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
we'll have to compare your Radiohead album rankings too to Best Ever Albums.
Yeah, they're already off. I would not put this at 9, but that's just me.
And as we talked about this week, for those wondering what Matt's bronze medal band is, it is Hoobastank. So spoiler alert.
It's a close third, though, John. Close third. All right, so Pablo Honey was released on February 22nd, 1993. Like I said, that's their first album. They have a total of 9. Their most recent was 2016's A Moon-Shaped Pool. I think we're due for another Radiohead album, fellas. It's been too long, but there are rumors. People are speculating that they have broken up, which I hope is not true. It's all pure speculation. There's nothing. The band is not acknowledging that. They're basically doing a lot of their own projects and stuff. Yeah. So there's lots of genres, but we're just sticking to Pablo Honey. We can file this under alternative rock. I saw grunge in there as well, so sure, I threw that in there too. There's probably some elements of that. They have lots of influences. Some of ones coming up include Queen, Bob Dylan, Pink Floyd, Elvis Costello, Joy Division, Susie and the Banshees, Magazine, REM, U2, the Pixies, Sonic Youth, the Smiths, Aphex Twin, Miles Davis, and Charles Mingus. Many of those artists we have covered already, maybe even all of them, to be quite honest.
Where's the Queen in Radiohead? The rest of them I get, but yeah.
Yeah, they said there was an early, maybe they just liked Queen a lot, and I don't know. Okay. But it's not, I wouldn't say showmanship either. I don't know. Yeah. Bands that they've influenced include Travis, Coldplay, Arcade Fire, the Beta Band, Muse, Broken Social Scene, M83, Bright Eyes, and Frightened Rabbit. And their highest charting albums, they have 2 albums that hit number 1. They include Kid A and In Rainbows, both hit number 1 in the U.S. The highest charting single, the Pablo Honey's very own Creep, which reached number 34 on the U.S. charts. And some history of the band. They formed in 1985 at school. There was the Abingdon School in Oxfordshire in England. By Tom York on vocals and guitar and Colin Greenwood on bass. They were in the same class. A year ahead of them were Ed O'Brien on guitars and Phil Selway on drums. And then the last member to join was 2 years younger than York and Colin Greenwood, was Colin Greenwood's younger brother, Johnny Greenwood, who is the guitar player. They originally called themselves On a Friday because that was the day that they practiced in the school music room. So that was what they went for many years. They were actually offered a recording deal fairly early into their establishment as a band by Island Records on the strength of an early demo, but they turned them down so that they all could go to university. So they did not get an album contract right away. But fast forward several years later, in 1991, Colin Greenwood met an A&R rep in a music store and gave him a copy of a demo. And at a subsequent show, that A&R rep, along with many others, attended a show at the Jericho Tavern, which was actually Radiohead's only their 8th live show ever. And based on the strength of that performance, they were offered and signed a 6-album deal with EMI, which seems, I don't know, it seemed to be kind of like, we saw you perform one show, we're going to give you an album deal for 6 records, right? Like that just seems, I don't know how record contracts go these days, but that, I don't know, that seemed to me to be pretty, I don't know, they seemed pretty confident that that would be a good thing. So they did eventually change their name to Radiohead at EMI's request. That came from, I think we might have talked about this before, but do you guys remember where they got their name from?
Radiohead? It was a song by one of the krautrock bands.
Talking Heads, correct. Talking Heads.
Oh, Talking Heads. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Do you know where David Byrne got the idea for Radiohead as a song?
I do not.
Josh or John, you probably know this guy too, but maybe John. What's that? What'd you say?
Can.
No, not Can. The actor Stephen Tobolowsky. I don't know if I'm saying that right.
Yeah.
The guy that played Ned Ryerson in Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
So apparently he was writing. He worked with David Byrne to write to help him write a movie called True Stories. And during these writing sessions, I guess Byrne said that he did. Tobolowsky didn't have a whole lot of great ideas, but the one that he really stuck with him was when Tobolowsky told him that he had an ability to read the tones of people, and he had some psychic abilities that would give him. And so David Byrne really ran with that idea and kind of created this like idea of Radiohead, like you're tuned into all of these things. So Radiohead got their name from Ned Ryerson, essentially, is what happened there. Fair enough. They released a 4-song EP called Drill in 1992, but it sold poorly. They weren't really catching much of a wave in the UK. So the record company wanted them to focus on the American market, and they chose American producers Sean Slady and Paul Q. Coldery to produce the first record. And so they come in to produce the album. It failed to make an impact initially, critically or commercially, but Creep did start to get some interest initially in Israel, of all places, and shortly after that, the U.S., after getting a lot of rotation on MTV. They were initially offered to support Duran Duran on tour, but then they opted to support Belly and PJ Harvey instead to get more credibility, apparently. And they also later toured with James and Tears for Fears in the UK. And so the title Pablo Honey comes from, as John sent us a link earlier this week, from a Jerky Boy sketch along them and Slow Dive, right? That was the other band that did named an album after a Jerky Boys sketch. So that was Pablo Honey was the name of the sketch, and you can actually hear they actually put the sample from that, I guess you call it a sample or a clip from that phone call, in the middle of one of the songs. Did you guys catch that at all in listening to this album? That the actual Jerky Boys sketch? Yeah, I didn't either.
I did catch it.
You did?
Yeah, only because I was like curious if it was going to show up, and it was weirdly I caught it without thinking I caught it like along the way.
Do you remember the song, John?
I don't. It's in like the middle of the album, isn't it? Like
it's towards the beginning, actually. It's How Do You?
Oh,
it's this guitar. It's in the guitar solo of How Do You, and you can barely hear it in the background. So I've listened to this album for years. I've never picked up. I actually had to like search for it. Yeah. So
maybe I'm just telling myself I heard it, and maybe I did. You know what I mean? Like it's like one of those things you talk yourself into. So, oh yeah, of course I heard it, but I felt like I did. But yeah, I mean, Pablo Honey isn't even like a top 5.
It must be buried in there because I didn't.
No. Oh, it's buried in there. Yeah, but it's there. It's definitely there. It's in the guitar solo. It's towards the end of the song. So,
and I think we can all speak to the fact that in canon of the Jerky Boys, Frank Rizzo is the classic
they should
Jerky Boys sketch. Yeah,
yeah. The name of this album should have been The Super Across the Way. So, you might have remembered they had a performance on MTV Beach House where they played Anyone Can Play Guitar, where Tom York jumps into the pool afterwards and he almost electrocuted himself.
Yes.
Yeah, because of the microphone was still in his hand, so that could have ended really poorly. Yeah. And apparently, based on the work of the producers on Pablo Honey, the American band Hole hired Slade and Coldery to produce their 1994 album Live Through This. So that's why Courtney Love got those producers, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, in the not too distant future. So there's a lot of stuff on this in this research about the song Creep itself. It's a pretty interesting song in Radiohead's catalog, but they initially played it during a session when they had their the label there and the producers there. They're trying to write the album, and York jokingly called it before playing it. He said, "This is our Scott Walker song," and the producers misinterpreted what he was saying and thought, "Well, that's too bad. Too bad their best song is a cover." But it's actually, they had to convince them that no, it's actually not a Scott Walker song. So, so they put the label loved the song when they heard it, but the BBC blacklisted it, wouldn't play it because it was too depressing. So they did not get play on BBC Radio.
For the British?
For the British, yes. Pretty, yeah. Yep. They did record a censored version of Creep, which actually when I had the CD, that the censored version was tacked on at the end after Blowout, but in the original version they dropped the F-bomb when they're talking about being special, and then and so the band initially didn't want to do it. They were reluctant to do it, but then they realized they had second thoughts when they realized that one of their idols, Sonic Youth, had already done that, so they thought, well, if Sonic Youth did it, then I guess it's okay. So so they released that as a censored version.
I always think it's funny how much you love Radiohead and how much Radiohead loves Sonic Youth, and how much you don't like Sonic Youth.
Oh, Tommy York! I could say this. Tommy York likes a lot of stuff that I probably wouldn't like. So, but that's also why I'm glad that stuff is out there, because it influences people that like music that is more appealing to me. So, also the guitar part, the strumming electric guitar part of Creep. Came from guitarist Johnny Greenwood. He kind of improvised that, and the reason that he did that was because he was really trying to screw the song up, because he didn't like how the first time they played it, it was too slow. It was and he was trying to spoil it, but it ended up kind of being a signature part of the song that stuck with it. So, and the other funny thing about Creep is, you guys maybe you heard about this, came up in the news recently, but it does have elements from a song called The Air That I Breathe by a band called The Hollies, which we've talked about. I don't think we ever actually covered. It was written by Albert Hammond, who's Albert Hammond Jr.'s father, that guy from The Strokes. So it was written by him and another guy by Mike Hazelwood. And if you hear that song, it's got very similar elements to Creep. So a lawsuit was later filed, and they now share writing credits with those two gentlemen. And then, just a couple of years ago in 2018, Radiohead sued Lana Del Rey for her song "Get Free," which aped from Creep as well, and that became like that was just an interesting thing. They got sued, and then they sued somebody else over the same song. Kind of different parts of the song were the reason for these lawsuits, but you can hear them in both of those songs. Lana Del Rey publicly said that she offered 40% to Radiohead as a royalty payment, and she said that they wanted a full 100%, which people, it's kind of, the word is that
maybe they
that
could
actually
crowdfund it like they did their albums.
Well, the word is that they probably didn't do that, because that's absolutely absurd that somebody would actually do that. I think the only time that that's ever really happened it happened with the Rolling Stones and the Verve when they sued them for Bittersweet Symphony. But eventually it was settled. That was settled. Radiohead, nobody in Radiohead shares any writing credits with Lana Del Rey on Get Free, but I always thought that was kind of a funny thing, the back and forth lawsuit nature of Creep. And finally, last thing I'll say, in September of 1993, Radiohead performed Creep on the Late Night with Conan O'Brien show, and that was representing the first time a musical guest appeared on Conan's show. It was Radiohead performing Creep. So, nice. So there you go.
How long? Didn't they recently play Creep for the first time in like a bazillion years too?
They not just recent. They famously would not play it for many, many years. They hated like what it represented, and they tried for so many years to kind of go against type, if you will, and try to get away from that. But I've actually seen them play it live, so and it's been a while since I've seen them. So they usually don't play it, but they have played it here and there. They've made their peace with it. But yeah, for a while they pretty much hated the song and what it did. So so there you go. So Radiohead's Creep, Radiohead's Pablo Honey. Excuse me. Let's go with Josh on this one. What do you think of Pablo Honey?
Yeah, so it's interesting. You're the one that introduced me to Radiohead, and
you're welcome.
I've always thought of them as like kind of weirder and more avant-garde. Later on, I think they in experimental, I think they do go in that direction more increasingly as the albums go on, and so that was kind of my frame of reference. And this album is like, it's just way more traditional sounding, right? It's like it's a rock album with kind of a sprinkling of interesting like electronic stuff in it, and it doesn't really sound like some of their later albums from what I remember. I haven't listened to this.
You knew
album.
Creep though, right? You knew.
Yeah.
Did you know Creep? Okay.
Yeah. Right. But I haven't listened to this album in a long time, so I was coming to it pretty fresh, and it's so like, I feel like this is so like an approachable album and a listenable album for me. I really like Johnny Greenwood's guitar. That's kind of the standout part to me. I always feel like Tom York kind of gets a bad rap for his singing, but I think his voice is, or I guess because he has like a unique singing voice, quote unquote, but his voice is pretty good in this, and I feel like it's strong. He's kind of got this, you know, a haunting quality to his voice, but he can also belt it out at times. It also kind of reminded me of like Bono at times too, on like Stop Whispering. He can go into that like that big like stadium type of singing, which I really like. But I really like the way that they, I don't know, the way they play the guitars and weave the guitars in and kind of jab in different guitar parts, like on Creep is a perfect example of that, where Greenwood's guitar goes dun 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 and right into the like staccato part into the chorus, and there's other times throughout the album that happens, like Anyone Can Play Guitar. I really like that the guitar note is like held at that part, and that they speed up into the great chorus on that. The last song, Blowout, has almost like this weird like bossa nova guitar part that's reminiscent, and then the song it's not like a bossa nova song, but I don't know, it has that quality to it at the start that kind of drew me in. You know, they do like the perfect amount of distortion for me throughout the album. Like they incorporate that on How Do You with like piano, and I really just like their choices. I think the songs are conventionally structured and kind of conventionally sounding in a way that, you know, they're really I just found this like a really good album to listen to. It's like a really good rock album, and they have catchy like choruses and just a good tempo to it and a good speed, and everything just kind of feels like really like it's really working well for me. I do have like a hard time describing, I feel like I had a hard time describing why I like this album so much, but it's just a solid rock album ultimately, and I think I'd be interested to hear if like Radiohead fans like they fell off after Pablo Honey. I don't like what they did or changed or whatever. Like, because I feel like they do take like a right turn somewhere and go like way more experimental.
They do. I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone that says they fell off after Pablo Honey.
Yeah. Are there those people out there?
There may be people that say they don't like them after this album. I could absolutely.
I mean,
see somebody saying that.
I just say that because it's hard for me to fathom that you like this album, but you don't like their next one, because it's this album but better, right?
Yeah,
but
I guess you know, OK Computer is held up to like this high, like put on this pedestal, and I'll, you know, when we listen to that, I'll reappraise it, but yeah, I think this is a solid debut entry. It's funny to think of them like in the same time frame as like all the Britpop that's coming and stuff, and they're just like they've transformed and kind of like outlasted all of that and are like this whole other kind of different species of band, and I don't know, it's just funny to see the evolution and the time frame that these things are working on, and that where they were in the early 90s with this debut album and where rock was, and kind of that the fact that they were even on MTV and like approachable versus like where they are now. It's just an interesting evolution. So point being is I really like this album, and it's a thumbs up for me.
Yeah, it's always interesting to travel back here and like hear Radiohead as like a true alt rock band.
Yeah,
like because this is a true alt rock album.
Yep.
Like it's funny in listening to this. It's kind of like if you took part Britpop, because I think, having not listened to this album in a while, I didn't realize how much it shared in common with Britpop of the time, like that Suede album we listened to, or just Blur or Oasis. There's quite a bit that sounds like that. I did notice, Josh, like you said, there's an odd pieces of time where it sounds like U2 a little bit too, weirdly, which I was like, I don't remember that at all. And then of course there's like sort of a feel of like the Jesus and Mary Chain a little bit, where there's some distortion and stuff. Like you throw all them together, right? Like Jesus and Mary Chain. It's certainly not as abrasive as like My Bloody Valentine or something, but you can see that they definitely are studied on that sound, right, because they're not afraid to put the distortion on most tracks here. But yeah, traditionally structured album, I'd say, in that it's, it doesn't overstay its welcome. It is guitar driven in a way that Radiohead rarely is this guitar driven in the future. Sort of famously going away from that and sort of, some might say, energetically and inspiringly, and some might say both energetically and inspiringly, but also a little bit like pompously, like sort of like we're a different type of band than these other bands. And it's like, you still have Pablo Honey, dude. Like, so there was a period, and like, don't tell me you didn't listen to those like Smiths albums and REM albums either in the 80s, because we know they were there, dude. And just like everybody, you listened to plenty of Velvet Underground albums too. So and I'm more just kidding with them as well. But yeah, to hear them as a traditional band, knowing where they'd go later is interesting. I certainly like Radiohead too. I think I'm a little bit more in the sense of like, I don't buy into these like mythologies with albums, and that's why I like revisiting some of these along the way. And you kind of, I feel like for a certain type of alt rock fan, you have to say that like everything about certain Radiohead albums is unimpeachable, and you have to say like this album sucks and doesn't have any ambition to it, right? And it's like, that is not the truth. There's lots to like about this album. It's just conventional. And, of course, what makes Radiohead in terms of its artistic legacy, or sort of that transcendent element of it, is not going to be a traditional straight-ahead alt-rock album in this lane. So I think because of that, this album becomes underrated, because the title is a little inexplicable. It just, high art Radiohead with like a Jerky Boys sketch. And it's not even like ironic. I think it's more just sort of like, well, yeah, we like the high art, but we also, like to ass around and listen to the, the Jerky Boys as well, which always kind of makes me laugh thinking about that. I think that hurts it a little bit. If they named it something else, it would be there. I do think the fact that, even though Creep is less, I know they do a lot of different stuff in the future, but it's not like Creep is this like complete outlier from the rest of their sound where you can't see parts of their DNA in that song as well. There's still some things that travel, especially to the bends from that song, that's there. So I do think this album's a little bit underrated. But it also, if they just released albums that sounded like this over and over again, Radiohead wouldn't be Radiohead either. So I like it because I like distorted guitar. I like the fact that it's a nice slice into like what Radiohead sounds like when they're cleaner, and a little bit linearly produced. And yeah, they make a pretty darn good like Britpop band and distorted guitar rock band as well. So and you know what? Every once in a while, I wouldn't mind if they slipped in this lane a little to remind it. They don't always have to abandon this. Yeah. So yeah, I enjoyed this one.
This is the perfect entry-level Radiohead album. Start at the beginning.
Yeah, it is kind of like, in the sense of, if you go off of the idea that you start with something that has some energy and some potential, and then you build into like your great works, and then you get old and bloated at the end. It kind of makes sense in terms of their career. They just don't have a old and bloated stage yet.
Yeah, so I owned this record shortly after it came out. I liked Creep, and it kind of was very much occupied the same place in my music catalog as a lot of other alt rock bands at the time. Kind of like, this is what I listened to mostly. It was like alternative rock in the 90s, right? And I remember
the one that made Radiohead your second favorite band, right?
No. It was years before I came to that revelation. So I liked it fine. Josh, this kind of goes back to when we covered. Remember we talked about Altered Beast, Matthew Sweet, and I was like, there's certain albums that like, I put away for a while, and then I didn't realize how much I liked it till I came back. Well, this is another one because I always liked the first 5 songs. I think it starts off really strong. I think You into Creep. I think How Do You is it's a quick, song, great guitar based song. Into Stop Whispering, which was one of the singles, and I think that's a standout track on this. That's one of the standout tracks on this for me. I like the different kind of tones it takes. It's got like more of a bombastic thing. It builds, but it also has like a very slower kind of more melodic falsetto York voice going there. And then they do the acoustic Thinking About You, and anyone can play guitar with that cool bass line and more rocked out. And I somehow lost interest around ripcord throughout the rest of the record, and it wasn't until years later when I just kind of put it on and I was like, damn, the second half here is better than I remember it being, and that was also, that was when at the time when Radiohead probably was up there as one of my favorite bands. But I still think it holds up. Like, I think that Ripcord, Vegetable, Prove Yourself, I Can't, they're all great. Lurgy is one of my all-time favorite deep cut Radiohead songs. It's very unlike a lot of their, I guess this whole album's unlike a lot of their stuff, but there's just a vibe with that song. I love the guitar part. It's got a very, it's like an atmospheric kind of piece for me, and it's a very calming type song, and I wish it's only 3 minutes and 8 seconds, but that song could go on for another 20 minutes, and well, maybe not 20, but it could go on for a while, and I'd really like the groove and the vibe that they fit there. And then Blowout's just a cool song. It kind of stands out a little bit. It's this cacophonous. You're right, the Bossa Nova thing, I never picked up on that, Josh, but I think you got something there, that guitar tone there. So and then it builds up to this like big bombastic kind of ending, which does portend what Radiohead would come to do later on, like more experimental stuff. So I agree with you, John. I think that it's in some circles it's easy to put this as the worst Radiohead album, and I think, I don't know, to me I think it's not one of their best, but it's like the Beatles, right? Like even their quote unquote worst albums are still really good, and I still think this is a really solid record. I mean, it is kind of more in line with what the popular rock music was at the time. You're absolutely right, John. If they did more, just kept putting out albums like this, they still would probably be a good band, but they wouldn't be remembered, as anything like what they're known as for right now. Right. But just because it's just because their first album isn't on par with like some of their their seminal works doesn't mean that it's not a good album. And I like the fact that this represents a different side of them, right? Like, it's kind of cool to have a band be different things and to different people and not just stay with the same thing. And I probably wish, like you, John, that they would go back to more of this stuff. I don't think that they ever will, if they even ever do another album. I think that they've kind of made that clear. But I always do like going back to this. It's a really easy listen. It's a fun listen. It's not this overly ambitious kind of thing. Sometimes you can just make a straight ahead rock album with a couple of edgy parts to it, and just be happy with that. So I think it's weird that people just totally shit on it if that's what's happening, because I think even if it's not what you want it to be or what it is, what they became later on, it's still the melodies here, the musicianship. York's got a great voice. I agree with the U2 comparisons there. I never really thought of that either, but it did come up in the research too, and I was like, yeah, I'm hearing that too, So I think it's a solid record. And so definitely would give it a thumbs up. And I agree with you guys. I think it's better than probably and I think there actually is probably more of a retrospective kind of look back at this and say, this is better than what people initially said it was, because it didn't. It's, if you look at the reviews here, it's, mostly it's like 2 to 3 stars is what you're looking at, and I think I'd probably put it more of a 4-star record for me, So. So yeah, plenty more where that came from, though.
Yeah, it's certainly better rock album than a lot of the other rock that we've listened to of this point.
And rock that was selling at this time, that was like one-hit wonders that were all over the place. They could have been a one-hit wonder, but even going back to the record, you can even if they became a one-hit wonder with this record, I think it's still solid across the board.
Yep. Yeah, good stuff. Well, I'm excited to go on to their next, their subsequent albums and see how they change.